Matt, who is our VP of Customer Success. Many of you will probably interact with him on a regular basis, as well as Brad Ritchie. You've probably seen his face before if you've been on any training or have watched any of our training videos. And Brian, who are you're a certified Wi-Fi expert now, aren't you?
I don't like telling people.
Who does a lot of our support too. Yeah, we're going to go through probably about 9 of our favorite sort of behind the scenes things. Some of the things have to do with things that we've added to CDRouter this year. Some of them are things that have always been there. But other than that, let's get going. So I think, Matt, you're first, yeah?
Brian's
first.
Yeah.
All right.
Grab the mouse from you.
Sure.
Thanks. So if you're familiar with, if you do testing with CDRouter via the UI, which I primarily do, there's a feature for the device manager. It allows you to connect to the device you might be testing, connect to its UI, configure it, see its configuration. But for the longest time, you had to then disconnect so that you could run your tests. So more recently, we actually added the ability so you could connect to the device that you're testing at the same time the test is running. So I'm going to go through this as a tip to show you how to do that. So because you need to make sure you don't have a conflict of interfaces, the first thing you need to know is which interfaces are being used in the test that's actually running. So you can either go to, on here on this side, this is a test that it would be running, or a screenshot of one that's running to see which interfaces are in use, or you can look at a test package, the details of a test package, to see which interfaces are used before. So in this case, I think it's probably pretty small. It's small on my screen too. It says ETH9, and then the Wi-Fi AX cards are in use. So having that information, you can go over to the device tab, and now you know that which ones are in use. You can use an interface that is not in use to connect to this device. 2, hit the connect button. Now you may need to turn the device on, but if the test is already running, obviously the device is probably on, so you just need to connect. And then finally 3, hit this view management interface, and this will open up a browser to the device that you're testing. And here's an example of it. So what might you want to do while the test is running? In this case, I'm running a scaling test, so it's really kind of neat to see the clients come up online in the view of the device as they're being created. You may want to see if your device has a log, you may be able to look at the log file while the test is running. If your device has statistics, you could watch the statistics while the test is running. So if you're not familiar with the device manager feature at all, there's a KB article down here. We've provided a link for, so you can go look at that. But I think by this point, most people have experienced what the device manager is capable of. So anyway, now you can connect while the test is running.
Yeah, that's a great feature. Just to add on to what Brian was saying, I use it all the time just to check the status of interfaces as well while tests are running, especially if you're doing like a renumbering test or something that's manipulating the interfaces somehow on the DUT, and you suspect that maybe things aren't working quite right. You can log in with the device manager now and just kind of keep an eye on what the DUT's view of the world is, in addition to what CDRouter's view of the world is. So it's useful for that.
Yeah. All right, Brad.
All right. Okay. Tip number 2. Overriding test vars. So oftentimes when you're setting up CDRouter, you have a configuration maybe for Wi-Fi, one for Ethernet. Maybe you have one that includes IPv6 and one that doesn't, or just some other settings that you want to be able to, you need to have different configs for. And the more differences you have, the more config files you have, it just gets difficult to manage, especially if you only need those changes temporarily. So we've added a feature where you can change these test vars at runtime. This is actually now part of the GUI. So when you launch a test package, you have your confirmation dialog where you can select a different config or a different device. That has always existed, but now you can change test vars individually. So you can use the same config and then just override a particular test var. And you can see that button down at the bottom. That will add an entry for you to add your test var. It gives you the option to override test vars in the main section, as well as in any multi-port interface test var groups like LAN2. You can also delete test vars, which essentially is like removing them from the config file And if CDRouter doesn't find a test var, or if it's commented out, then it just uses the default value. So if you have a test var set in your config file, this will revert it back to its default. And then you can also delete an entire test var group. So if your config had 3 LAN interfaces defined, for example, and you wanted to just comment one of those out, normally you'd edit the config file, put the ignore keyword there, or just delete it completely. This just allows you to remove it just for that test run. So all of these only apply to a specific test run. They don't actually modify the config file at all.
That's handy.
And then, oops. When you run your test, it will show you any of the test vars that have been overridden. These will be in the start log. So you can see for any particular test run what's been changed in the config file.
Yeah, and that's what those red lines are there,
Yes.
right? The notice.
Yeah,
The
so that
notice
appears in your test log, so that
Right.
you can, and when you rerun a test from the results page, those overridden test vars will still be retained. So you'll get the confirmation dialog. You can either take them out, reuse them, change them. So you don't have to add them all again each time you run the test package if you're rerunning it from the results.
There's a couple of good questions about this right now, actually. So
Mhm.
one is, will this work via the API?
Yes, it will. So this is incorporated into the API. I don't have an example of it here, but it's documented in our API user guide. And so you can absolutely do this from the API.
And then secondly, well, how does this impact how the results are presented? Like, how do you know, like, that this is associated with a set of results, just like the config is, the override is?
Yes, it is, but it does. The only indication currently is in the start log.
It's this right here,
It's
right?
this, what you see on the screen.
Right.
So there's no highlight or anything to tell you that
Against the
particular
viewpoint,
set of results.
Use
Sorry.
a cursor. No one's
No,
pointing at it.
no, this is the start log.
Yeah.
So I'm using the cursor. But
Yeah.
other than this, your results page won't tell you that anything's been overridden or not.
Okay.
But you can edit the notes page on your test results to indicate that.
Okay. Yeah. So Hatham, if you heard that, you can, the overrides will be recorded in the log. And then I guess we recommend taking that and putting it in.
Taking that or putting some kind of note into your test report that just tells you what you've changed.
Cool. All right. Matt, to you.
All right, thank you. So one of the things that we added this year was the ability to have CDRouter use a consistent, or what we're calling stable, MAC address on the WAN. And sorry.
Mac user.
I'm a Mac user. I click buttons here.
We were teasing him about it yesterday. It was like that tricky right click.
Every time. So we added this feature this year, the ability to have CDRouter use a consistent, stable MAC address on the WAN. It's particularly useful for people that are testing with CDRouter in a shared network environment, like the one I've got here on the slide. And the reason that we added this is because we were finding that in certain shared setups, when CDRouter, I should back up a second, CDRouter typically and historically has always used randomized MAC. So every time you start a test package, CDRouter will create a new random MAC to use on the WAN. That's how it's worked since the beginning of time. And the problem with that in a shared setup like this is that there are sometimes upstream devices within the network, CMTS or a router or a switch or something like that, that will have ARP caches, neighbor caches that can potentially contain stale information if you are rerunning a lot of packages in a short period of time. That can obviously influence your test results. So we created this feature this year to actually allow CDRouter to have a consistent, stable MAC on the WAN address and prevent those kinds of things from happening. The way that it works, it's very easy to set up. There's a new test var called WAN MAC stable, and it's in the WAN interface section of the config file. So you just set that to yes. And what will happen is CDRouter will take and use the configured CDRouter OUI, which is another test var. And for every interface in every system come up with a unique host identifier and append that to the OUI. So that means that when this feature is turned on, you should never have a conflict with another CDRouter system if you happen to have multiple CDRouter systems all connected to the same shared environment and running together. They will always be unique. They will always be the same every time you run a package on that interface on that system. We recommend now that anybody using CDRouter in a shared environment turn this test var on and set it, just to avoid any potential issues or problems with the test cases they're running.
Right. And it's not on by default.
It is not on by default. That's correct.
Hatham just said that this tip solved 70% of his problems.
Excellent.
And to be clear, the beginning of time is 2002.
We had our 20-year anniversary last year.
Yeah, we did.
Wow.
Yes.
It's been a long time.
All right. Back to Brian.
Back to me. All right. Okay, so this is a kind of a UI centric one as well. If you use a CDRouter UI for your testing, this is for people who may have test packages that run really well, like 95% of the time, but every now and then one or maybe two of the tests within your test package fail for some reason, usually because maybe your performance threshold was not met on one particular run, or there's a lot of test cases where we use UDP to verify that something has happened and a UDP packet will get dropped just at that moment in time. So you may ruin a perfectly good test package run, right? It's always passing, but now and then you get one that fails. So CDRouter has this option to retry test case failures. So if you look at the test package when you're editing one, and if you select the edit options button, this section down here will open up, and there's a bunch of runtime options that you can enable. One of these is the retry. So if you enable it and then specify a value, you instruct CDRouter to retry any test failure before moving on to the next test in the package. So what that might look like is, this is scanning through a log file here, a test fails. CDRouter will then automatically, if it's enabled and you have and it hasn't run out of retries, it will retry again. Hopefully it will pass the next time and move on. And then at the end of the test, excuse me, it will tell you how many times it had to be retried before it passed. And you can also see this in the results. So in this particular case, the test had to be rerun twice, but it ultimately passed. So, I mean, it could still fail for a legit reason, but if there's, for one of these instances where a threshold might not have been quite met, it was just missed by a megabyte per second, or if like a UDP packet was dropped or something, that will cause, especially in a Wi-Fi environment, that happens all the time.
Right.
That's when I use it a lot, is in Wi-Fi environments, because there is packet loss every once in a while, and you want to make sure that failures are legitimate failures. This is a good way to find that.
We do have a KB article about retrying test cases, and this is here in the link. I imagine the runtime options are also via the API as well. I don't know specifically. But I think there's an option to turn them on via the API as well. I assume so.
Part of the CLI argument. So
okay, perfect.
There are switches for it that you can automate.
Cool. I just had a thought about this. This is probably good for stability too, right? Because
long running tests.
If you start to notice that
Especially
these are getting
Wi-Fi
more
again.
frequent and it's redoing. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Right.
Brad.
Me again. All right. So resource locking. Resources is just a word we apply to anything that you can edit in CDRouter, like configs, packages, devices, even your results, adding users. We've added a feature to lock these. So in CDRouter, the user model, basically any admin level user is able to create, delete, modify anything on the system, regardless of who owns it. So this feature allows you to lock any resource to kind of as a way to prevent people from inadvertently, or even yourself from inadvertently deleting or modifying one of these resources. And so if, for example, you were to select a whole set of results and, just as part of a purge or a bunch of configs with the checkboxes, with one of them locked, that would fail, and you wouldn't accidentally delete something that you meant to keep. So this is available for results configs, users, packages, and devices. You can see it's in the view of each of those, the main view. When you click this button, click the lock button, you're going to get a prompt to just make sure you want to lock it or to unlock it. And then once it is locked, it'll have this banner just to make it clear that this can't be modified until it's unlocked. So you can create a copy. There's actually a link there. So if you click that, it will create a copy for you that you can then edit. You can also do this from the list page. So any index page, if you go to the packages page and it will list all of them, you can enable these by clicking the padlock icon to toggle that on or off.
And that column is sortable as well, right? So you can click the column header and pull all the
Yes,
locked items to the
I
top.
believe that's true. Yeah. So you can see all the items that are locked. On this slide, we have CDRouter comes with a number of predefined test lists. These are test packages that have a set of tests that we recommend for different use cases. Those are all locked by default. CDRouter automatically installs these. The lock is available to be turned off, but these are exempt from any locking when you reinstall or upgrade CDRouter. So what that means is if you were to unlock this and modify it, all those changes would get overwritten the next time you upgrade CDRouter. So it's always good with these pre-installed test lists to make a copy of them and use that as the one that you want to modify and customize.
Cool.
So don't touch.
Yeah. So even if it's even if it is locked, it will get overwritten.
Let's talk about these now, because I mentioned this again at the end, but these test lists are we've been adding more of them at the requests of you guys and just in general from what we've learned from the industry. These are all sort of default test packages that have everything you need for a particular topic to make getting started a little bit easier. We've been adding a lot more. So we lock them by default because they are the ones that we've curated.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have,
And we sometimes update them or add more. So
Yeah, exactly. That's why they have this extra level of protection.
right.
good question from Mikkel. Is it possible to have a guest user that can only see specific test reports via a link, but not run anything?
Absolutely. So when you create users, there's either an admin user, which has full control over the system. So if you have multiple users and they're all admins, every admin user can do anything, regardless of who owns that resource. Other users who are not admin, don't have admin access, can only see what is explicitly shared with them. So there is a share button on each of the resources, devices, configs, packages, and results that you can then, when you click that, you can select which users can see that. And then those users will be able to see those, but not modify them. They can't run tests. So that if they see the package, they can't actually launch it. They can't delete or modify.
All right. Who's next?
Oh, wait.
Oh, you had one more.
Oh, that was just to tell you to make a copy.
Make copies.
That's what it looks like when you make a copy.
All right, Matt.
All right, thank you. So all of us here at the table look at thousands of results, CDRouter test results, and there's a few little things that are hidden in the log viewer that I use all the time that I thought I would just talk about really quick here today. The first thing is what we call comments. And CDRouter's log viewer has the ability to add user-defined comments to each line in the log file. This is really, really handy. I use this feature all the time. When you're looking at a large log file, doing some analysis on it, and you find some interesting thing that you want to make a note about, you can just click on the blue button right here beside the log number, and that will open up a text box that looks like this. You can leave your notes in there. It does support Markdown, which is really handy. So you can put links in there. You can do text formatting, bold, italic, bullet lists, all that kind of normal Markdown stuff.
We tried pictures. Because CloudTruck shares this annotation feature, and Tom and I tried to add pictures the other day, and it works, but
Oh, yeah.
it's wonky. Don't try it.
You can add emojis.
Oh, you can definitely add emojis.
So this is just a great way to add some additional context to the CDRouter log, and it's really handy. There's also some navigation arrows at the bottom. So if you've got multiple comments in a single log file, you can click the up or down arrow here to jump between them, which is also a really nice feature. It makes quickly getting to another important section of the log file really easy. And there's a show and a hide comments button up here, which globally toggles all comments on or off. And then the last thing that's nice is that these comments are actually persistent. So if you do some markup and add a bunch of comments, and then I want to share this result with Brad, I can send him the link and he'll see all of my comments, and
Thanks.
Brad can come in and add his own comments. So it's a very nice feature. Check it out when you have time. If you need to turn it on, just click the blue, or it's not blue until you actually add a comment, but click the little button right next to the line number. Another feature that I use in conjunction with comments is logline highlighting. And basically what this is if you click on a line number within the log viewer, you'll notice that it toggles between 4 different colors: yellow, blue, red, and green. And this is just another great visual way to add a little more importance to specific log lines. I use this all the time. I use this in conjunction with comments. I would typically, when I leave a comment in a log file, I'll also highlight the line either red or green. That's just my workflow. That's what I've become accustomed to. And then when you're scrolling through that log now, you'll see the highlighted log line. And then in my case, I'll usually have a comment associated with it as well. So very easy to use. Again, you just click on the line number and it will toggle between those different colors, which is really handy. And again, this is persistent as well. Another incredibly useful feature that I'm not sure is super evident when you're looking at a log file in CDRouter is that you can actually set relative timestamps, which is really useful when you are looking at very or if you're trying to look at protocol interactions and you want to see the time between different packets, for example.
Especially if you look at your line like 206, it says waiting 90 seconds or 90,000, right?
Yeah.
If you put that on there, then you can quickly go down and see where 90 seconds is.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And to turn this on, all that you really have to do is click on the timestamp on a log line, and that will set that line as the 0 reference point, and everything before that you'll notice will now have a negative sign, and everything after that will have positive. Doesn't have a positive sign, but it's plus time. Really useful feature. I use this all the time, actually. There's another little thing. This came up with actually one of our customers a few weeks ago. The timestamp format that's displayed in the log file can actually be changed. It's a preference, and these are the 2 formats, excuse me, that are supported by CDRouter.
Yeah, it is global though, right?
It is global.
It changes it for everybody.
Correct.
On the system.
Yeah, it's a global preference that applies to everything. I like the shorter format myself. That's just me, because it preserves a little more space within the log file for large or longer messages.
Right.
So that's just what I do. But if you want the full timestamp, you can go and toggle that on if needed. The last thing I'll mention is stars and flags. So these are icons basically that you can toggle on and off. Flags apply to log files within a single result, and stars apply to results. I use these just to indicate or elevate the importance of a log file within a result, or of a specific result on the results page. So you just click on the flag or the star to toggle it on and off, and then again you can sort on that column to bring everything that's flagged or starred to the top. I know that Brian, you use this feature, right?
Yeah, because if
Quite a bit.
results can be pages long, right? If you have hundreds of them, and if you want to kind of see or compare one on the first page with one on the fifth page. I star both of them and then sort by star, and it brings them both to the front page.
Mhm.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
you have to click through pages.
Very, very, that's actually a great use case, especially when you're looking at a result that might have hundreds of test cases in it, right? If there's just a few that you want to look at together, you can flag them, sort on the flag column, bring those all the way to the top, and there they are. Cool.
All right.
Mhm.
All right. My last tip. Okay, so we have performance test cases. We've had them for quite some time. There are two sets. There's ones you send data from a single client, and we have ones that send from multiple clients. The problem with the multiple client tests, at least from feedback from customers, is that they all have to generate the same identical data. And it's more lifelike if you could configure different clients to send different amounts of data. So we added some perf client tests, we're calling them, so you can configure, but there's a configuration part to it. So that's what this tip is about, just showing you where it is in the config file. So the first thing you have to do, you have to make sure you have a more current template in your configuration file. So if you look here, if you expand the about part, there's a version number here that tells you which version of CDRouter this configuration file is based upon, or really which template you used at the time. Must say, I usually see ones that are very old in here. I get it. Once you make a config file, you don't really want to touch it. I get that, but you're missing out on new test files that we add or others that we delete. So if you have an older one, you might want to consider upgrading. There's a button in the upper right corner, and it'll upgrade it to the latest template. Now, when you click on that, you will be asked to make a backup. I strongly recommend making the backup because it may do some changes that you weren't expecting. So make a backup of it, but try to use the new one so it'll have the new test files. You can also select a bunch and do them all at the same time. However, you don't get the handy dandy, do you want to make a backup? So you have to make sure that you really want to do it. There are some caveats in a link here of what might change. Mostly it's comments. If you have comments in your config file, they may get moved or overwritten or something. So make sure that you know what it does before clicking a bulk upgrade anyway. It's much safer to do one at a time. You can see what the changes are. So now that you've done that, go find the multi-port section in your config file. So this part here is if you want to define a group of clients that do one set of performance and then a different group of clients to do another set, you have to define another group of clients, and that's how you do it with the test file group. Remember, get rid of the ignore keyword, or else it's the whole test group is commented out. That's basically a comment. Now that you've done that, if we look here at within that second land group, you can see we've basically copied the performance configuration or test vars from the main into each one of these. So this section here would be editing the performance criteria, thresholds, and settings, what you want to actually send for that particular test group. The main one is still there. This is for your main group, or the initial one that you define in the main section of the LAN portion of the configuration file, which I say right there. So now you can have more than one, you can have three, you can have four, you can have whatever group of sets of clients. You can now configure each set. And if you run these tests here, they will look at that configuration that you've just set up and will send traffic. I'm saying it wrong here, but so you have multiple clients sending traffic, but now you can have multiple groups of clients, and they can each send different types of traffic and have different thresholds. And these tests allow you to do that with the configuration that I showed. I think I said that.
Yeah.
Ask me another question. Just send me a question if you didn't know it's not clear.
We're gonna have to do an entire other webinar on that topic.
That's a heavy topic.
There's a lot there.
So before we go on, there's a couple more questions that came in that are a little bit more general that I'll get to at the end. But there was a question about perf,
Yep.
which is funny because you guys are asking enough questions. I'm not going to have anything to talk about at the end. Is it possible to configure the client to use only 100 megabit Ethernet and adjust the thresholds appropriately?
Well, you would, that was, oof. Yes and no, because your interface, you have to configure the interface, right? So,
Which you can do now.
which you can do now, but all the clients
All
on
the
that
clients,
interface
right?
have
So
to
all the
adhere to
clients will be
that.
100. So long story short, there's a new feature that I'll cover at the end that lets you change the Ethernet link speed for the WAN in the LAN if you want. But like Brian said, that'll end up applying to every client that connects them.
This is more useful if, say, there's two Wi-Fi cards and a Ethernet card, right?
Right.
If you want to use all three, you could divide a group of clients for one Wi-Fi card, another one for the other Wi-Fi card, and the last for the Ethernet.
Yeah.
Right, and they could all do different ones.
Right.
That's where it's most useful.
Yeah, I use it to simulate clients that have different performance targets. So I might, for example, have 5 clients set up that are sending at 10 megabits per second, and then another 5 that are sending at 20 megabits per second. You can create as many clients now with as many different sort of traffic profiles as you want, and all the rates can be separate,
Right.
which
Right.
is really handy.
Yeah, and the other one I'll do is one Wi-Fi card will be on the 2.4 band, the other Wi-Fi
Yeah,
card will be on the
that's a great
5
one.
gigabit band, right? And now typically they are different speeds, so
Yeah.
that's the best use case for it.
All right.
All right.
Brad.
My next tip is USP scenario scripts. So CD routers, test suites, each module, you know, they have different tests within these modules. Each one is based on a script that does a specific thing. If you want to modify any of those, we do provide the source code and you can develop your own tests, but that's time consuming. Not everybody knows how to code, and it's a big task. USP scenario scripts gives you sort of a lightweight way to customize some of your testing. So basically what it does is you can create a very simple script to tell CDRouter's USP controller to talk to your DUT, the agent on your DUT, using any of the commands in this table. And each of these commands has various parameters to customize what is contained in that command, as well as what to verify in the response to it. Some of these other ones, such as open and delay. Open is just to, is there a close in there?
If there is, there's something on the page.
But open is like the connection can get closed if the device reboots. This will tell the controller to initiate the connection back to it. Delay is just to put in a pause in between commands within your script.
Useful between gets and sets, probably.
Right, exactly. Or if you've rebooted it, you can just have it pause for a certain period of time. There's also a built-in delay as well. But all of this is customizable by you. Each script looks something like this. It's got a very simple syntax. All of this is documented in the user guide. We have a special KB article that is dedicated to USP scenario scripts. You can see in this example, it just has 2 commands. The second command tells you which parameter you want the controller to ask for, and then to verify that the value returned matches a particular pattern, or a value in this case, but you can do patterns, ranges, other things like that. You can also set things or make changes on the device. This is the link to the documentation, so we'll explain all of the details so you can start writing your own scripts. To get started, you need to connect to your CDRouter system, the NTA 1000 platform, edit a file, and start entering in the contents of your script. Once you've saved that, you edit your config file, and you'll need to uncomment the USP scenario path and give it the location of your script that you just edited on the system. Tell it how to find that script. And then the script will be run by this USP scenario 1 test. That will, when you add that to your test package, it will read the script, run through that entire script. This is what the results look like. So every command that was in your script gets its own section and its own pass-fail value. And so you can see those in the log file, and as long as all of them pass, then the entire test will be marked as passed. If any one of them fails, then the entire test gets a fail. There's also a bootstrap scenario script that can be enabled. This is exactly the same as the scenario script that you use for the test, but it's run during the start procedure. So you can have a separate file, a separate script that's run during the start, so that you can do some configuration on your device before any tests are run. So as soon as your device comes up and connects to the controller will run this script so that any configuration that needs to be done, or if you just want to pull some stats and have them in the log file, it will show those.
So the bootstrap scenarios, you can actually sort of use them as a de facto. I want to configure my, if you happen to support USB, you can use it as a way to configure your device before testing.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so anything you could do with a USB controller, you could do during that startup.
For the most part. So these scenario scripts, they're lightweight, like I said. So there's not a lot of logic like if then else statement, looping. So it's not a full programming language. It's a straightforward script that allows you to send commands. There are parameters for those commands that you see in the documentation. So if you want to do something more sophisticated than that, we do have scripting available, but it's much more of a development effort.
Right.
And but that's certainly possible as well. But this just gives you a quick and easy way to add that customization. Your script file can contain multiple scenarios. So each of these top level curly braces is what we call an individual scenario. They each have a unique name. And when you run that USB scenario 1 test, it will run all of the scenarios in the file. So it'll go through the first one, all of those commands, then continue on to the second one. And the overall test result will be the result of all of those scenario scripts combined. So they all have to pass in order to get a full pass. But there is a single mode that you can turn on using this USB scenario single mode. Its default is no. So all of the scenarios in your script will be run when you run that test. If you set this to yes, then it's only going to run one of those scripts at any given time. So you can include the same USB scenario test within your test package multiple times. So it's essentially repeated. So for every instance that you add, the first one will get the first scenario, will run the first scenario in your script, and then it will stop and end, and you'll get the result of that run. Then when it continues to the next instance, it'll run the second instance in your script, and so on. If you have more instances in your package than you have scenarios, it will just loop back to the first one. So you just have to know that how many you've got in your script and run the appropriate number of instances.
It's also worth mentioning that we have the same functionality for CW and PH.
Yeah, for TR69.
Yes, and SNMP. So there's SNMP scenarios, TR69, CWMP scenarios as well. And I'll hand it over to you, Matt.
Right. Thanks, Brad.
So this year we've been talking a lot about stability testing. Jason's been putting out a lot of material about that, and it's one of my favorite topics. And I thought I would just discuss a few of my strategies for stability testing. One of the things that I've done recently is try to define stability testing in terms of stability over fixed periods of time. And before I get to that, actually, let me just go back and really quick hit on some of the key points for why stability testing is important and what it actually is. Stability testing is the continuous verification of a device, its functionality and performance over longer periods of time. Typically, when people get started with CDRouter, what they'll do is run some functional tests. They might not take more than an hour or two, run some performance tests in separate packages. And again, it doesn't take that long. And everything looks great, and functional tests are all passing. Performance tests are looking good as well. Stability testing involves combining those two things together and then running that for a longer period of time. And what you'll see is that functional interactions on the DUT can impact performance. And the only way you'll actually see that is if you run both functional and performance tests together and do it for longer periods of time. It allows you to find things like this right here. This is an actual CPE device from a large ISP. It's something we have in our lab. And As you can see, this is a performance graph. It starts out great at about 200 megabits per second. There's one little blip here, but then after about 3 hours, the performance drops significantly to around 20 megabits per second, and it stays there. And I know from experience working with this device that the only way that it will recover is if you reboot it. Again, if you were to run just performance tests on this device, what you would actually see is a pretty stable, consistent line at 200 megabits per second. If you were to run just functional tests on this device, those functional tests would pass for essentially as long as you ran them. You could loop them indefinitely and they would continue to pass just fine. But when you mix the two together, you start to see interesting things like this.
200 is just what you chose.
It's just an arbitrary number that I chose that was
That's not a max or
It's
anything.
No, but the interesting point about the one of the biggest use cases that we had for this was that it was something that would not have been discovered in the field for like months,
correct.
but it was like in a couple hours with the CDRouter test. Right?
Yes, and this customer came to us with this problem and asked us if we could help them reproduce it. And what we found is that by adding in some of our functional tests that do a lot of protocol interactions in a very short period of time, we were able to speed up the reports that this vendor was receiving from their customers in the field that might take a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks to even a month before they started showing up. We could reproduce that in CDRouter very quickly.
So it's just a test package that has a performance test followed by a DHCP test or DNS test followed by another performance test. You're just intermixing the tests.
That's exactly it. Yeah. My normal recipe for stability testing is published elsewhere. And
yes, it's smart about it.
is basically the top 100 for V4 and or V6. And then if you have Wi-Fi, I add the Wi-Fi module in, and then I run a handful of performance tests and I loop that. Cool. I always find interesting things. So getting back to this tip, stability testing, obviously you need to run it for longer periods of time, but that is very open-ended. So what I've started to do is define stability testing metrics based on fixed periods of time. The periods of time that I like are 6, 12, and 48 hours. I like 6 hours because in the morning when I come in, I can start a stability test and have that result before I leave at the end of the day. So it's nice to start a stability test, have that data, look at it at the end of the day. I like 12 hours because I can start that when I leave, and in the morning I'll have some data that I can look at. And then likewise, I like 48 hours because I can start that on a Friday when I leave, and I'll have a longer set of data to look at on Monday when I come back in.
Right.
These are just the ones I use, the ones that I like. Of course, everybody should choose stability metrics that work for them and that matter to them. I've seen some people test for a week. I've seen some people test for 2 weeks. So really it's up to you to decide what makes the most sense. One of the things that we added this year to make this much easier is a new package level option, which you can see down here, that allows you to specify how long you want the package to run. So in this case, this package, the stability package, will run for 12 hours and then it will stop. Now, previously, that we added this in CDRouter 13.17, prior to this, you had to sort of estimate based on the number of, or based on how long it took to run one loop of tests, do the math out, and then run the package for that number of loops. It was imprecise. It was not super accurate and repeatable. So this is a nice new feature. This was a request from one of our favorite customers. So great.
Have favorites.
It's all of you, everyone from here.
So check this out if you haven't actually used this yet. There are a few other options here that you can play with.
This is automatically loop?
Well, yeah, I was going to say it's important to note that this alone doesn't make it last for 12 hours. Correct. You have to enable the looping feature as well.
Correct. That's a good point, and I didn't actually show that here. Oh yeah, I did. It's checked off.
That's it. Yeah, it says once.
It's only going to work once in that case.
Yeah, okay.
So there's a loop. There's a loop. Basically, you want to loop forever.
Correct.
There's a forever option there, so that your test package, however long it is, will just keep running until the 12 hours is right, or the 8 hours, or whatever it is.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
So the last thing I'll mention about this is obviously stability testing takes a long time. The longer you run a stability test, the higher your confidence can be in that device's robustness and stability. So obviously, having the ability to run a stability test in parallel and not consume the entire system, it can be handy. So consider adding some additional test instances to your system if stability testing is important to you, because that will allow you to have one test instance or two test instances devoted entirely to stability testing, while you have a few other test instances that you can use for regular functional testing or QA stuff, dev stuff, whatever it is that you're working on.
And I think my favorite piece of advice that you gave about stability testing is if you don't encounter any stability issues, run the testing for even longer.
What do you do when you finish your stability testing?
Do it again.
Stability testing.
Okay, just a quick sort of omnibus of some of the other stuff that we've added, that some things we already talked about. I mentioned the Ethernet link speed thing. You can now set those as test bars. And so the link that you're using for your LAN port and the link that you're using for your WAN port can be adjusted to 10, 100, 1,000, or 10 gig if you're using one of the 10 gig interfaces.
It's a physical layer. You're actually negotiating the speed at the link layer.
Yep. We mentioned the test lists. These are very easy to use. It's great because if you just are looking for a place to get started on a particular topic, you can use that test list, build a package straight out of it, or add it to another package and go. And then one of the things I did want to mention on here is you see that we have added the RDKB test lists. So those are the test lists that the RDKB team uses to validate the open source RDKB implementation. And there's an article that we just put out about working with open source solutions and how to do it. So like RDKB is nice because they publish their results and you can use your own and then compare to see if anything's changed. And then we just announced, the Purple Foundation just announced their high-level API certification. So the process there is kind of the same, right? So you see what they got, you can do the same testing that they do, and compare and see if what you've added has changed anything, or if anything needs to be fed back into the open source standard too. That's great. But definitely for the Purple high-level API, reach out to us if you're interested in testing that, because that just was launched Monday, I think. Matt talked about parallel testing. We've enhanced that since we did it about 18 months ago, 2 years ago. And so now you can do multiple wireless clients. And also, if you are having devices that are connecting to the cloud and using our ICS feature that lets you have your devices connect to the internet while they're testing, that will now work over parallel test instances as well. And then last but not least, we've always had the ability to insert scripts into CDRouter. And I think we have a particular script test var for run this whenever you would have restarted the DUT, which you can use to work with your own automatic power booters. But now we have some test vars specific to the Synaxis NetBooter. The Synaxis NetBooter product for a remote power supply for your restarting your DUT during tests. We have 1 minute left. So if I didn't get to you, we will answer you offline. Just a couple of things I wanted to cover real quick. If you obviously, most of you or many of you have done training with Brad, but we have taken an effort to go through and record all of those things into little bite-sized videos. So if you go to QICafe.com/CDRouter training, you can find all the videos that we've done.
Are you pointing to
there?
Too?
Huh?
You want to do this?
Well, it's the first one. I'm pointing at the screen.
I know you are.
I need like a glove that hits.
Those training videos are new for this year as well. So they did not exist last year. And you guys are always adding new stuff there as well.
Yep.
So check back often. And if there are certain areas or certain pieces of functionality within CDRouter that you think training videos would be helpful for, let us know.
Yeah, definitely. The ones that are up there now cover most of the basics. And then a little bit about shared test setups and a couple of other topics, TR69. But we're always, if you have a suggestion for what you'd like to see next, please let us know. The second link here is our white paper on how to build an automated test strategy. It's really good. It just talks about sort of what testing you should do when and how and for how long and at what stage of development and what sorts of people should be looking at those results and how to incorporate it into your CI/CD. It's very, very good. So take a look at that. And then also take a look at last year's tips and tricks webinar. As
Mhm.
there's a whole bunch of different tips and tricks than the ones we did this time. And you can find that there. And I'll put this one up shortly and email it out to people who were here and not here. And lastly, well, not last, second to lastly, do stay up to date whenever possible. The latest release is 13.21. And if you have any questions about how to do that, please reach out to us.
And then upgrade your configs.
And then upgrade
Right after.
I always do want to mention, obviously CDRouter is one of our flagship products here at QA Cafe. But we also have two other great products. One is CloudShark, which is a way to store, organize, and work with packet captures. It actually works with CDRouter if you have your own CloudShark instance. But we also have a lot of people, operators in particular, who are using CloudShark as part of their network infrastructure to troubleshoot issues. Some are even gathering packet captures from CPE, which is a new thing. So check that out. And then also QA Passport. So if you are testing end devices at all, set-top boxes, IoT devices, Passport is a test tool that we have built specifically for that use case. And it's very easy to use. It basically involves plugging the device in, watching it pop up, and selecting a bunch of tests and hitting go. And it's very cool. So if you have any questions about that, please let us know. All right. And if there's any more questions, we will follow up with you offline on them.
Great.
Yeah. If there's anything else, enjoy the rest of your year and happy holidays to those of you who are celebrating. And we'll see you soon.
Hey, take care. Thank you.
Do it.
Stop the video.